Hansel and Gretel. The winter wind howled against the thin walls of the cottage, but the cold inside was sharper. Hansel pressed his ear to the floor, his heart sinking as he heard the stepmother's icy voice. She spoke of a house with no bread and a forest with no return. Beside him, Gretel trembled, her wide eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight from downstairs. While the house slept, Hansel slipped into the garden. The moonlight turned the common pebbles into glowing white jewels. He filled his pockets until they hung heavy against his legs, each stone a silent promise of a way back home. He looked up at the dark trees, the shadows moving like giants, but his hands stayed steady as he gathered his hope. As the sun rose, the family marched into the heart of the woods. The stepmother walked with a rigid back, never looking behind. The father kept his head low, his footsteps heavy with a secret he couldn't bear. Behind them, Hansel lingered, dropping a single white pebble every few paces, marking a trail of silver through the deep, decaying leaves. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows against the towering pines. Their father's voice had promised a quick return, but as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, only the eerie silence of the woods remained. Gretel pulled her shawl tighter, her breath visible in the cooling air, while Hansel stared into the darkening trees, waiting for the moon to rise. When the moon finally climbed above the canopy, the forest floor transformed. The pebbles Hansel had scattered began to glow like tiny fallen stars in the dark soil. With a surge of hope, the children followed the shimmering breadcrumbs of stone. Every pebble found was a heartbeat of relief, leading them away from the wolves and back toward the familiar. As the first light of dawn turned the sky a soft violet, the children reached their doorstep. The father's face crumbled with joy when he opened the door, pulling them into a fierce, trembling embrace. Behind him, the stepmother stood in the shadows of the kitchen, her face a mask of false smiles, hiding the growing bitterness in her heart. The reprieve was short-lived. A few nights later, the heavy thud of the bolts sliding home echoed through the room. The stepmother had locked them in, turning their sanctuary into a cage. Hansel reached for the window, but the moon revealed nothing but empty hands. He had no pebbles this time, only the heavy silence of a house divided by hunger. The next morning, as they were led deeper into the woods than ever before, Hansel reached into his pocket. He didn't have stones, only the dry crust of bread from his breakfast. With trembling fingers, he crumbled the bread into tiny pieces, dropping them one by one. He didn't see the shadows moving behind him, nor the hungry eyes watching from the branches. They waited for the moon to rise, just like before. But when the silver light finally hit the forest floor, there was no trail to be found. Every crumb, every hope of a path, had been stolen by the birds of the air. The forest felt larger now, the trees leaning in closer as the realization hit them. They were truly lost. 3 days of wandering had hollowed their cheeks and slowed their steps. The forest had become a maze of grey trunks and endless shadows. Just as their strength began to fail, a beautiful, snow-white bird landed on a branch nearby. It sang a melody so sweet it felt like a warm embrace, beckoning them to follow it deeper into the golden morning mist. The bird led them to a house that defied all reason. The walls were baked golden brown like fresh bread. The roof was shingled with pink frosted cakes, and the windows were panes of clear, shimmering sugar. Forgetting their fear, the children ran forward, breaking off pieces of the sweet walls, their hunger finally meeting a miracle in the middle of the woods. A soft, creaking sound came from within. The door swung open to reveal a tiny, hunched woman leaning on a cane. Her voice was like honey, inviting them inside with promises of pancakes, apples, and nuts. She looked like a grandmother from a dream. But as the children stepped over the threshold, the warm sunlight outside seemed to fade into a cold, dim interior. The dream turned into a nightmare with the rising sun. The sweet old woman revealed her true iron-strong grip, dragging Hansel to a cage and locking him away like livestock. She turned to Gretel with a voice like grinding stones, commanding her to cook and clean. The house of sugar had become a prison of bone, and the feast was no longer for them. Every morning, the witch hobbled to the stable, her dim eyes unable to see the truth. She demanded Hansel stick out his finger to feel if he had grown plump enough for her oven. But Hansel, clever even in despair, reached for a thin chicken bone left from his meal. He offered the cold, dry bone to her questing touch, keeping his fate at bay.
A month passed, and the witch's patience finally snapped like a dry twig. She declared that whether Hansel was fat or lean, he would be her dinner. She ordered Gretel to stoke the fire until the oven roared with heat. The air grew thick with the smell of wood smoke and a terrifying intent as the witch prepared the final stage of her cruel trap.
The witch turned to Gretel with a wicked grin, telling her to crawl inside the oven to see if it was hot enough for the bread. But Gretel saw the hunger in the old woman's eyes and knew the trap. She feigned confusion, tilting her head and pretending not to understand how to enter, forcing the impatient witch to show her the way. With a strength born of desperation, Gretel gave the witch a mighty shove, sending her tumbling into the heart of the flames. She slammed the heavy iron door and slid the bolt home, the metal clanging with a final, echoing ring. The house of sugar groaned as its dark magic began to wither, and Gretel ran toward the stable to free her brother. Before fleeing the cursed cottage, the children discovered chests hidden beneath the floorboards, overflowing with pearls and precious stones. They filled their pockets until they were heavy, transforming the witch's stolen hoard into their family's future. With one last look at the house that had nearly been their end, they stepped back into the sunlight of the forest. The path home was blocked by a deep, rushing river with no bridge in sight. Just as despair began to settle, a great white duck glided across the crystal water. One by one, the bird carried them upon its soft, feathered back to the opposite shore. As their feet touched the familiar soil of their own woods, the air seemed to grow warmer and the trees less daunting. The children burst from the tree line, shouting for their father. He looked up, his eyes filling with tears as he realized his heart's greatest wish had come true. The stepmother was gone, and the shadow she cast had lifted. They showered him with the witch's treasures, but the real wealth was the family made whole again, standing together in the golden light of home.